Welcome back to Everything All Right, the literary podcast, literary talk. We're back to celebrating authors and writers in all their stunning variety. And this is actually our debut going multi-channel because it's not only a podcast any longer, but equally a YouTube channel. If you like what you see, if you like what you hear, do subscribe. The more the merrier. And for the premiere today, I have just the guest for you. A best-selling author, historical fiction writer, journalist, and TV presenter, the beautiful Elodie Harper.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you very much. Lovely to be here with you. Thank you for having me on, Ellen. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, that's the least. And look, I'm actually going to dress up.
Oh, love it. I've got a little amphora as well, so.
Okay. But Elodie, you must be quite exhausted. The House with the Golden Door, book number 2 in the Wolfden trilogy, is just out and you had quite the book tour. How do you feel?
Oh, it was so lovely to go and meet readers and talk to people, because obviously for the Wolfden with the pandemic, you know, I did think one live event. So my lovely publisher kind of went in the other direction, and yeah, we did quite a lot of events. But it's been really nice. You know, a high point was going to Waterstones Liverpool, where they were so supportive of the Wolfden right from the beginning, and it was just so nice to meet the team of booksellers there. And also going to Cambridge with Jenny Saint and Waterstones Piccadilly with Jenny Saint. You know, the joint events are a lot of fun. And yeah, just every place I went to, I met lovely people and heard from readers. And it was just, you know, it's very nice because you send your book out and, you know, people read it, but then to hear what they felt is always lovely, as long as they like it. But, you know, if they're going to come to your event, it means they liked it.
And did you have a personal special celebration on publishing day, like the best plate of Pompeian pasta you can imagine?
Oh, do you know what? I just didn't think about it at all. I didn't organize anything. So I did an event, which was lovely, but I didn't have a launch. So I think, you know, for the final book in the trilogy, I will have some sort of party to mark the whole 3 books.
Yes, please don't have my invitation get lost in the post.
I certainly won't. Obviously not.
But first things first, let's go way back, as we should as historical fiction writers. Elodie, how did you get into writing? Tell us.
Well, I've just always loved stories, to be honest. I mean, I've been to the British Museum today, and I remember going around there as a child and just, you know, just enjoying seeing all the objects and thinking about the past. And, you know, I think people who write historical fiction, it's a really, I'm sure it's the same for you as well. It's like a really long-lived passion for the past from childhood. And, you know, initially I didn't write historical fiction. I wrote a ghost story, The Binding Song, which was sort of based on Greek mythology, which then, when it was published as a crime novel. So I wrote a couple of books in that genre. But it was really historical fiction that I did always actually want to write. But I think you need to have a bit of confidence, because obviously there's a lot of research, and you're not just making it all up. You know, it's kind of, it's a funny, obviously it's fiction, but it sits in a funny place because, you know, you have to get quite a lot of things right as well. So.
Absolutely. I'll ask you a little bit about that later, because as you say, your first foray into writing was actually in a very different genre, a genre in which you right away impressed the master in this craft, because you actually won a short story competition that was judged by Stephen King. So how come you first had interest in crime?
I mean, I have to be honest, the short story I won was for a ghost story. So I kind of had an interest in the supernatural, but because it was set in a modern day prison, it had quite a lot of crime elements. And, you know, when you mash up genres, I think that's something that's quite common for writers to do when they start out and they've got no kind of concept or knowledge of publishing. And then once you kind of get on board with an agent and a publishing house, you realize mixing up genres is kind of problematic. So I had to sort of crime the ghosts in the first book. So I have to be honest, like crime was like a real adventure for me. It wasn't a genre I planned to write in. But I think as a journalist, you're just very used to covering a story on anything. So one day you might be doing a court case, another day you might be, like the other week I was filming a whole bunch of people with ukuleles in a pub. You know, you just don't know what you're going to get. So when my agent, my lovely agent Juliet, was like, oh, you know, how about crime? I was like, yeah, why not? So that was kind of how that happened.
Did you get the agent after you won that short story competition? How did that happen for you? Because getting an agent is obviously the big stepping stone into writing, and it can be a quite soul-destroying journey, I think, for an aspiring writer to get that agent. So how was it for you, Elodie?
I mean, I was so terrified and intimidated by the prospect of approaching agents, and I just didn't believe that the slush pile was a thing. I thought it must be a fib, and that actually everyone's lying and you have to know people and you have to be referred and all the rest of it. So I was about to go on maternity leave, and I applied for this short story competition at the same time that I approached Juliet Mushens, who I really wanted to represent me, and she got back straight away and offered. So I had envisaged weeks of rejection, and I'd really steeled myself for this, but I got incredibly lucky. You know, and I guess also, like, I did know quite a lot about Juliet before I queried her, so I really hoped that she'd like my stuff and that we'd get on and all the rest of it. So yeah, that was very lucky, but I remember feeling just terrified about sending that manuscript out on submission, really. You know, and I was just stunned that the slush pile is actually a real thing.
It does.
That agents do just read random stuff that you've sent them. So, you know, I do feel incredibly lucky. I think, you know, I think being persistent is something you have to be as a writer, but I also think there is an element of luck, because a lot of really brilliant books get published that don't necessarily get picked up or noticed or anything else. And certainly, you know, the difference in reception from my first two books versus the Wolfden, you know, it's just completely different.
So how do you explain that difference in reception? How and when did Amara, the heroine of the Wolfden trilogy, walk into your head?
Almost instantaneously, I have to be honest, when I decided to write about that particular subject matter. The idea of this character, of the sort of intense power struggle between her and Felix that propels the trilogy, that I wrote a really detailed synopsis for the trilogy in, I think, a weekend. Like, it was just like an outpouring of passion. I feel like, yeah, it's hard to explain, but I think sometimes a lot of different themes and ideas are running over in your mind, and then it just comes out. And it was very much because of Pompeii, the place that it is, and the type of things that I wanted to write about, you know, my long running fascination with the Roman world, I guess. Yeah, it's hard to explain, but it happened quite fast.
There's also a real mood at the moment, as you mentioned, Jennifer Saint, whose book Electros at the moment, #1, fantastic. Really, really delighted for her. It's a brilliant book. As was Ariadne, yes. So how do you explain that there is this real mood at the moment for these feminist retellings of ancient Greek and Roman history?
So I think these stories that are enduringly popular in any form, they're stories that a lot of writers have grown up with. You know, certainly for me, I just loved watching Tony Robinson's Odysseus, the greatest hero of them all, on TV when I was a kid, you know, and reading like kids' versions of the Greek myths. So, you know, people who are into books and history and stories, this is something that's very present for them. But at the same time, although there are great female characters, it's not been told from the women's viewpoint. And the older you get, the more I think you feel the need to be seen. And I think there is now an expectation by women that they should be seen and they should be heard, and their stories are worth telling. So I think things like the Me Too movement and just a lot of cultural shifts have coincided all at once. And it's led to this enormous appetite for women to see themselves in stories. And you know, for me, I have to be honest, it wasn't just about women. I really, really wanted to write about the lives of enslaved people in ancient Rome, because as somebody who's kind of read about the ancient world for a long time and read a lot of Roman literature, I just feel that this particular group of people have had a really raw deal on how they've been portrayed in fiction. And there is now this movement in scholarship and archaeology to be much more serious about thinking about the lives of enslaved and freed people in a way that it just wasn't before. And Pompeii is kind of at the forefront of this. The sort of stuff that archaeologists concentrate on now is really, trying to uncover more stuff about ordinary people's lives. So I guess for me, writing my book, it's like both those movements are present in what I'm trying to do. To the ancient, I think the ancient world in particular, the texts that survive are written by elite male writers, and classics has traditionally been, right up until quite modern times, a subject that is beloved by kind of elite male people, in the modern world as well. And so it's had this kind of not very inviting reputation, I guess, which has definitely changed a lot in the past decades. But I guess there's still, a long way to go in how we think about the ancient world. And of course, it wasn't all senators and Ciceros and, emperors. It was ordinary people.
Yeah. Ordinary people and women, because it wasn't a man's face who launched 1,000 ships, let's face it. it was actually a woman's face. So, and of course, when we go into the ancient myths and Pompeii, we're in the realms of tragedy, and tragedy just seizes and touches us. So how did you do your research?
So I have to be honest, with the sort of the volcano was, to me, the least interesting aspect of Pompeii. I'm aware it is a town that's kind of overshadowed by tragedy because of how it ended. But I was really fascinated by the life there. Mary Beard writes about it just so engagingly in her book Pompeii, and just as a place, it's quite unlike any other site, because you genuinely can walk the streets and see very much what it used to be like, in a way that if you go to Rome, for instance, it's much more fragmentary, and what survived is, so much of it hasn't survived. Whereas in Pompeii, you can see actual paintings on the walls, mosaics on the floor. If somebody walked into their house 2,000 years later, they would still recognize it as their home. Enough of it survives. You've got like the marble countertops in the bars, the wheel ruts in the road. And for me, the most fascinating building of all is the Lupana, the brothel, where, it's been better reconstructed than a lot of the other buildings. So it has its upper floor. So you walk in and it has a ceiling, which immediately makes it feel more real. But also, quite aside from the reconstruction, a lot of it just survives. You've got the 5 rooms with still the beds in them. You've got the paintings on the walls, these erotic frescoes. It's such a very well, exactly.
Famous,
yeah, they're the most famous part of it, and the reason why it gets so many tourists. And yet, even though it's so famous and it's so vivid and visited, like the actual people who lived and worked there are still kind of way back in the shadows. Even now, they were stigmatized and overlooked in their own time. And when you go on a tour, there's not so much about who these women might have been as people. It's more the kind of titillating aspect of it that tends to be the focus. So yeah, for me, I felt really passionately that I wanted to write a brothel book, which would be kind of the opposite of what people would expect a brothel book to be. So focusing on all the other aspects of the women's lives, not focusing on the sex work. Obviously that's there, but it's kind of there almost off the page generally.
Yes, it's not, I mean, it is a vivid part of the book, but there's nothing, it's not in the foreground at all. That is true. So what finding touched you the most when you delve deeper in your research, apart from actually being in Pompeii?
I think the graffiti. So, aside from the like really sort of bright red political graffiti, I can't pretend that I'm like the sort of scholar who was able to go around and read all this Latin graffiti in the brothel. There are online resources and books that have transcribed it, and generally lots of translations as well. But the graffiti is what just really touches me about Pompeii, that we've got the actual words of ordinary people. in a way that you don't normally get. So in the brothel, we've got a lot of the women's names, which I then used in the book. We've got just hints of some of the women's personalities. So Victoria refers to herself as Victoria Victrix, which is Victoria the Conqueress. So she has this very forceful personality. You've got Paris, you've got Felix, you've got Cressa, you've got Berenice. These are all people.
So
One of the women,
these are real names you found.
they are real names of real women.
And Amara as well, or
no? So
not?
I made the choice to make Amara and Dido the sort of two main characters. I invented them, and I think so. With Amara, her name is given to her by Felix, and it's halfway between love and bitterness. And it was, yeah. So I did divert from those two characters, and Dido is from Carthage, so Felix has named her Dido, almost like a sort of cruel joke, because obviously Dido, queen of Carthage. But yeah, the others are real names from the brothel, you know, and sometimes not even the words are what's so touching. Like the women have doodled on the wall, like a face, a bird, a ship. You know, you just get a sense of these being real people with real feelings and interior life. They would have had hopes, dreams, you know, it would have been an incredibly tough life, but the way I imagined them getting through it would be with a lot of humor, as well, as people do when they're in dark situations. You know, nobody wants to sort of be stuck in the dark, do they? They want to find the lightness in their own lives.
Yeah.
So, and then just the graffiti in Pompeii as a whole, you know, it's just the range of human emotion within it. You know, you've got a couple of guys, an exchange in a tavern arguing about who the barmaid fancies more. You've got like really profound reflections on mortality. You've got lots of quarrels and fights of people slagging each other off, drawing caricatures of one another. You've got some incredibly touching love poetry. You know, there's just everything on the walls
really
of Pompeii.
Nice.
Yeah.
So which scenes, the book is incredibly real, and it made me really sort of feel and fear for Amara, especially the house with the golden door. Actually, you really get her there
so much
as a person. So which scenes did you find hardest to write?
So in the wolfden, it would be actually a scene with Britannica. It's off stage, but we know something terrible is happening to Britannica, and it's reactions of the different women to that. I found that really hard to write. You know, the wolfden, I found a much harder book to write than the House of the Golden Door, to be honest. It's quite a lot darker, and even though a lot of it is off stage, you know, just kind of thinking about it it's such a delicate balance, because on the one hand, I feel it's really important to focus on the humanity of people in this situation, but then obviously their situation is quite distressing to contemplate as well. So getting that balance right in the wolfden was sometimes, you know, something that I spent quite a lot of time thinking about. And then I think, you know, the ending of The House with the Golden Door, I really struggled with. The ending of the wolfden as well, for very different reasons, was quite hard to write. But yeah, my lovely agent Juliet made me make the ending of The House of the Golden Door much more impactful. I kind of shied away from the impact initially, but it had to go the way it went.
It's brilliant, because not only do you now actually have the cliffhangers between chapters, but you're doing the Patrick O'Brien thing. You dare to have the cliffhanger between books, which is so cool. I was like, what? This is ending now? I want to know what's happening. So how, you say that Juliet had quite some input, which is, yes, a good agent. My agent too has got very, very fantastic, actually, editorial advice. And so The House with the Golden Door is incredibly pacey. It's full of twists and turns, almost again like a psychological suspense or a crime thriller. Actually, you never quite know where the next scene is going. So how do you go about plotting, apart from talking to Juliet?
So yeah, I do try to have a sort of, if not a cliffhanger, like some kind of propulsion at the end of each chapter, like so that each chapter is self-contained to move the momentum of the story on. How do I plot it? So I must be honest, so my first two books, the thrillers, I was much more lax with the plotting, and just kind of wrote them and made them up as I went along. But for these books, I think because it's a trilogy and I didn't want to write myself into any unpleasant corners that I would then really struggle with in 2 books down the line. They were quite tightly plotted all the way through. So yeah, I think just spending an awful lot of time thinking about it. And they did also change as I wrote. So after reading the first book, I did replot books 2 and 3. I realized I wanted to take it in a slightly different direction.
So Amara gained her own life.
Yeah.
How does your writing day look?
Honestly, I've got to be honest. So I also work as a journalist. I'm also a parent, and just I don't really have a writing day. I kind of fit in when I possibly can, when all the other demands of my life allow it. So at the kitchen table when I have the headspace and the time to
Are
myself.
there any must-haves that do you have? Like, I see that you're actually wearing little amphora around your neck.
I am wearing little amphora. It was a gift from my lovely editor Maddie for publication this week.
That's so sweet. So you have the amphora. Do you also have a cup of coffee? Do you have like a certain burning candle?
Always coffee. No, sometimes I'm on the sofa writing with the laptop on my knee at like midnight. Sometimes I'm sitting at the kitchen table. Sometimes I'm propped up in bed writing. I don't have any kind of ritual, just wherever I'm comfortable and have the space.
So what is your top tip to any nascent novelists?
I think, write what you're passionate about, really. Yeah. I think I remember reading in Stephen King's advice about writing that if you're not loving the book, nobody else will. Which I don't mean that every aspect, sometimes writing is a slog and you don't want to do it that day. I'm not saying like every moment you love, but I think the story, the characters, you have to feel passionate about them. So I would say just finish the draft. So, even if it doesn't feel very good, just get to the end of it. You can always revise it. The only part of the process you can control is actually the writing process and how much you enjoy actually writing. And so I think that's what I've tried to learn to do. You can't control much about the publication or, how people will receive your book, whether you'll get an agent, whether you'll get a publisher. So to try and enjoy the writing, I think, and I'd throw everything at getting an agent, getting a publisher, but there are times you just write a book for yourself, and I think that's a massive, massive achievement. So my sister-in-law Ruth is a hugely talented writer, and she's not actually published, but her books are among my favorite that I've ever read. She writes so beautifully. So you can still be a writer and not be published as well.
Yeah, just finishing a book is a massive achievement.
It's absolutely. A huge achievement, So,
but speaking about finishing a book, are you ready with book number 3 yet?
No.
Putting my foot in it. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I'm writing it at the moment. We're trying to write it at the moment.
Try to write. So if you try to write, that's actually, we shall leave you be, as you see, busy working mom. But I have one more question. That's actually a bit of a ritual with everything, all right? And that is the 5 faves. But very spontaneously, you have to tell me your favorite movie.
Oh, my favorite movie, that would be A Man for All Seasons.
Your favorite
by Robert Bolt.
Your favorite novel?
That would be The First Circle by Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Any favorite score or music you listen to when you write, or before or after?
I have really trashy taste in music.
Come on, tell us. Spill the beans.
It's all like really aggressive music, and there's a musician called Ruel who's like quite angsty that I listen to when I write. But yeah.
What's your favorite food?
My favorite food, that would be any Italian food, really.
And is that your favorite travel destination as well?
It is, yes, it is, yeah.
Okay. So there we go. Thank you so much, Elodie, for being our guest today. Thanks for listening and watching to Everything All Right. Our guest today to our multi-channel premiere was Elodie Harper, and we talked about her fantastic novel, The House with the Golden Door, which is out now with Head of Zeus. Order the novel online, or better still, in your independent bookstore. Other than that, I am Ellen Alpsten. Stick around, subscribe to Everything All Right, and listen and watch us next week.